Good morning. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, I'm Brad Green. I'm an engineering director at Google. I manage the Angular team and a couple of other engineering teams. But today I'm just really talking about Angular. To start off, I thought I would cover a little bit about what Angular is about and kind of who we are so you can know what to expect from us in the future. And just simply put, Angular is a platform for helping to make applications, whether you're on the web or really anywhere else you want to reach your users. If you're on the desktop, you're on the mobile web, or even the native mobile experiences. And if I dig down a little below that, what I mean by platform is that we build a framework like we started with in AngularJS, and we've added to that a set of integrated libraries, tools, and services that give you a complete end-to-end development environment for everything that you need as a developer. So whether you're sort of in the enterprise space, where you might care more about really large data sets, teams that scale to hundreds and hundreds of engineers, or be able to maintain my code base for many years into the future, or if I'm in the consumer space, where I might care more about reaching audiences in mobile, having really compelling animations, being able to localize in all the languages of the world, Angular has the facilities to get you there. And I know these are kind of fuzzy lines. I know, like, I actually build, in some of my teams at Google, enterprise products where we do care a lot about mobile and animations, and a lot of the very refined feature sets to keep our audiences internally engaged with our products. So no matter what side you're in, I think there's going to be some fun things at the show for you. So again, to talk about who we are and where we've come from, I thought it would be good to kind of explain our story a little bit. And I'm going to pretend we go back to 2008. And to get us there, I used some really bad clip art. So we can kind of roll the picture back. So back in 2008, before AngularJS started, I was working with this guy, Mishko, who really started the Angular project. We were working on Gmail. And actually, this is 2008, so the logo looked like this. And Mishko and I, our job was to help the Gmail team ship faster. We were in charge of developer productivity on the project. We kind of didn't know this when we got into it, but they actually hadn't shipped anything for 6 months. It was in kind of a bad state. And there were swamps everywhere. There was code nobody wanted to touch. And though there were tests, there wasn't really any tests that helped you ship. And kind of the behavior on the team was a developer would get his code into a state where he had manually tested it, or she had found a way to get everybody to agree that this looks like a good build. And they would stand up on their chair and say, hey, everybody sync to my change list, which is not really a good way to run a worldwide team. So we spent another 6 months. And we finally got the thing, and this was not just Mishko and I. This was actually the entire Gmail team and release engineering and test engineering and everybody together. But it kind of took a toll on us, and it left a deep impression about, well, maybe there could be a better way to start off on a project. And so fast forward a little bit to the end of 2009 when we started AngularJS. Here we are again. Actually, that wasn't our logo because it's 2009. We had this lovely yellow on purple. I don't know what we were thinking. We thought maybe starting off, I could have some default structure provided by a framework with some common idioms that everybody understands, and make it easy and natural to have testable code and some developer tooling to make testing easy from the start. And so that's how we started. The other thing we did that I think was maybe the most critical thing is we thought, well, we want to do this not just for Google, but we want to be able to share this with everyone in the world. And that became the most rewarding part about all of this, is that we could have conversations not just locally with, and actually Google's a big company, but really with everybody, every developer on the planet. We'd have something to share and be able to get stuff shared with us as well. And so this community aspect is really the most important factor to us. And that's why we're here. Me and my team, we came to have conversations with all of you and to hear what you're trying to do with Angular. We worked from the very beginning to grow this community, and I know Mishko and Igor and other folks on the team, they spent a ton of time answering questions on Stack Overflow and on the mailing list to the point where it is now, where the community really sustains itself, and it's amazing. Along the way, we realized that we wanted to have a deep sense of respect and a feeling of inclusion, and so we adopted a code of conduct that we want to make sure supports this feeling for everybody, no matter what venue you're on. If you're at a conference, if you're on GitHub, if you're on Twitter, or any of other Angular channels. And building on inclusion, we want to make sure that it feels welcoming, that we reach out to groups that might not be part of Angular, that everybody who comes has a sense of belonging, and that we have an opportunity to celebrate some of these things that go on. And so just a couple of them ways that these ideas have come out through the community. One of them is NG Girls. NG Girls is, yeah, woohoo! It's an organization that is put together to help girls and women find careers in computer science. And they do free workshops around the world. You can actually go get involved and help them out at nggirls.org. Pretty cool set of folks. Also, coming up just early next year up in Atlanta is a conference called NG Atlanta, where 75% of the speakers are women. This is an amazing result. Woo! Yeah. So you can go check them out at ng-atl.org. I hope to see you there. I'll be there as one of the speakers. I'm bringing the speaker list down. So in the Angular community, we talked about we had moved from AngularJS to Angular. In the Angular community, we actually have seen amazing growth this year, with over 100,000 developers coming onto the platform just this year. And we measure this by the amount of 30-day active traffic to Angular.io, which is the Angular site. And if I actually looked just yesterday, we have almost 900,000 developers using the platform, coming to our website every day. And if we add in the folks still working on AngularJS, it's about 2 million developers in our community. And it's certainly one of the largest in the world, if not the largest web platform community in the world. And so no matter where you are in the world, there's likely going to be a meetup that you can go to join and have experiences like you're having today with folks just like you who come together to share what they know and help each other build on their expertise. You can check this out at angular.meetup.com, find out one near you, and I really encourage you to build something in your local community. If you are working on something like this, and particularly if you're working on diversity and inclusion, I want to help. So you can either come up to me after the show, or you can just reach out to me on Twitter. If you're watching this as a video later, I'd love to chat with you. I'm Bradley Green. It's no E in Bradley. I'm an adverb. So just let me know how I can help. If you've been following along, we moved from our first product, where we focused on those sort of common idioms that scale and testing, and we built on it with a lot of the knowledge that we got from all of you and folks at Google as to how can we make this a fully scalable framework for all of your end-to-end needs. And in previous talks, I've shown how Google really runs on Angular, and tons of applications have been built on AngularJS. Everything from bug tracking to your recruiting workflow, compensation planning, support tickets, like nearly everything you can touch at Google, you're going to encounter something built in Angular. What we see inside Google is that we've made a lot of progress in migrating folks into developing on Angular from AngularJS, and a lot of these are actually mixing the both together. One of the things I think that's really interesting about this, though, is that the ramp on Angular has been incredibly fast compared to AngularJS, where it took us 7 years to get as far as we did in AngularJS. It took us about a year to get a quarter of that back in Angular. So the migration's going well internally. I can't share all of these applications with you. It requires an approval process, but there's one big one I wanted to show off a little bit. And this is our business intelligence platform called Plex. And Plex is used by about 90% of Google. I don't remember how many thousands of employees we have right now, but 90% of us use something that's built with Plex. And this is how we explore our giant data sets and figure out how the Google business is doing, building dashboards, exploring giant data sets, petabytes of data, creating alerts when interesting things change in the platform, and then creating sites so we can come back to that data again and again. Here it is in action. It's an application built with our material design components, using the router, using animations, using all the things that you would use to build applications on the outside. And yeah, it's internal only, so I'm sorry, no, you can't go play with it yourself. But we do have a lot of other external products built using the Angular platform. You can go see the Cloud Data Lab, which is a console built with Angular. You can go check it out. And if you want to build these sort of rich, beautiful dashboards, datastudio.google.com, still built with AngularJS. And we have many, many products that are external, that are using, that once were an AngularJS product and are now integrating Angular together, mixing them. One of them is express.google.com. It's our shopping app, where you can go shop at Walmart, Target, and all of your local stores. And they build not only their desktop site, but also their responsive mobile site using the same stack. Cloud Console, this is where you go to manage your cloud instances for data, for serving, anything you want to do in the cloud. And then recently, Firebase launched using Angular inside their AngularJS application. And not coincidentally, you can use a library called AngularFire to mix in the Firebase hosting, data services, and offline storage into your desktop and mobile applications. Now, right after this, Mishko, if you look at your schedule, it says he's going to talk about 7 years of Angular. Well, as you kind of get in the idea, I'm actually kind of talking about the history of Angular. So sorry, Mishko, you can't talk about that. Instead, I'm sure he's going to rewrite his slides right now. He's going to talk about what we've just been looking at, is how do I take an existing AngularJS application and integrate today's Angular with it. We've been working on making this easier and more performant, and he's going to talk about some of those most recent improvements we've made. So as we've been working on Angular from AngularJS, we know that the transition for upgrading takes some work. But we wanted to make sure that everything you do in Angular is going to be super easy to go from version to version. And we're seeing the results of that hard work to make sure that this is easy. Where out in the top 500 websites that we see out today, 50% of them are actually on the latest version. These folks have been able to easily upgrade and make sure that they're on the latest site, or the latest version that's stable, which is Angular version 4.4. And so we see sites like Grubhub.com. I used it just this week to get some pizza to my kids up in our hotel room. You can go to the NBA.com to find out how basketball is doing. And then back on 4.3, but pretty close, Royal Caribbean, you can go plan your next vacation. Forbes.com, you can go catch up on the latest news. We'll come back to Forbes. We've been actually working with some folks at Forbes on some of the latest technology. So then, that's enough history. I want to talk a little bit more now about where we are today and the platform, the end-to-end development experience that we've created. So where we started with strong underpinnings in default structure and these common idioms that everybody can know what to expect in an Angular application, we've built on this. One of the things you'll notice, even from the early days, is that we have a declarative way to specify the user interface components that make up our environment. So if I want to draw a grid that looks like this, a 2x2, I can just express what I mean in an HTML format where I say, hey, I want a grid list with 2 columns and a row height ratio of 2:1, and that contains just a bunch of grid titles. It's very easy for anybody to understand my intention based on this template. For all of these templating rules that we have, we made sure that all of them were statically analyzable, which means that any template you build in Angular can actually be manipulated using scripts. There's no ambiguity. Like, you can actually build a perfectly correct migration tool. And that's what we've done. We actually had to have this because you might not know this, but when we create a new version of Angular, our team, our engineers, are responsible for upgrading hundreds of applications. Every application that uses Angular, that falls on our team. So we actually had to make this toolable, and you can use the same effects in your own organizations if you need to migrate your application or an entire organization of applications. On top of this, we've built a style guide, and we worked with developers inside Google and the entire external community to agree on what we mean when we say, hey, let's create a file layout for a new project. Let's see, how do we build components? How do we do routing? How do we do really anything that you would use in the system? And folks in the community have helped by building on this with a bunch of tools called Codalizer. And Codalizer is a linting set that will tell me, am I still following the style guide? And so we can actually have tooling that keeps us on track. One of the decisions I'm happiest about in our transition to Angular was adopting Typescript. And originally, we were going to write our own type-based language. I'll get into why in a minute. But I'm much happier that we partnered with some folks who their core expertise is building a language, and they are completely focused on it, and they've been wonderful partners. So working with the Typescript organization at Microsoft has just been fantastic. This has given us a bunch of benefits. One is that like with that declarative HTML structure, I get to kind of declare my intentions. How should my APIs be used? It finds and prevents bugs. I get a much better IDE experience, and it allows me to change my code at scale. And so just as a little background for this, at Google, we've actually been doing typed JavaScript for over 10 years now. But we used a compiler called Clojure. And so the command line is called the JS compiler. And here's an example of Clojure code where we specify types in the comments, which has been great. Like, one of the nice properties of this is that I can just run the code without a compiler because the types are in the comments. But it's not super ergonomic. And I notice if I translate exactly the same code here into TypeScript, it becomes much more readable. And I get that nice IDE experience, because now the IDEs have sort of this first-class syntax that they can manipulate. It's been a pretty cool transition. When we started Angular, like we had done AngularJS, when we started Angular, we actually didn't have types. We were just using ES6. But as we added, we had a very deep culture of testing, and still, we found bugs. So even if you have wonderful unit test coverage, you can still find new bugs by adding types to your code base. And the reason that I can get a much better IDE experience is that, well, it's certainly true that today's IDEs do actually a pretty amazing job of helping me refactor code, go to the source, navigate my code, all these things. But it can only connect certain parts of my code and understand what relates to what. But when I specify the types, it actually understands the entire graph. And so if I want to refactor my code base at scale, this is really the only way to get there. If I want to be able to manage a large code base, and we've seen this at Google when we use the Clojure system, and TypeScript even gives us some better abilities. Tomorrow morning, you should join Daniel. He's the product manager for the TypeScript team, probably knows what's going on there, where he talks about tooling for Titans. Find out more about TypeScript. Now, in all of this, I personally think the hardest thing about scale is communication and collaboration. And so these features that I just talked about, they add up to a system where, with the declarative templates, I can actually communicate with everybody on my team. They understand what I mean, my intention. It's very easy. And beyond the developers on my team, designers can participate if they know HTML, testers, technical product managers. Really gives us a really nice base for understanding what the application is about. The types work similarly. It's, again, kind of a declarative way to express my intention for how my APIs should work. These common idioms give us that common understanding for how my application is structured and what to expect, no matter what Angular application I go to on the planet. And then we have the style guide and the tools to keep us on track, make sure we're all still writing the same type of code. We wanted to keep you starting fast and actually maintain a fast development pace. And so we built this tool called the Angular CLI. And you install it via NPM, and you can create a new application. It scaffolds out all of the test folders, all of everything you need. You get to add components, routes, all the things that you could add by hand. You can get the scaffolding started with the CLI. And then it helps you build for the developer tight loop of I type a piece of code, save it, and refreshes automatically in my browser, to all the way through to rebuilding for deployment. And we repeat, become successful. I want to pause for a minute. We're introducing a new concept here at this conference that we're calling Angular Labs. And Angular Labs means things that have gone through the design phase, initial implementation, They're ready to try out, but they're not quite fully baked. It's the time where we want feedback from all of you. And so one of the things that is in Angular Labs is an extension to the Angular CLI, where the Angular CLI is actually built on a technology we call schematics. These are templates for building directories, for building the actual code templates. And it comes with a set of sensible defaults that have worked for hundreds of thousands of developers. But some folks would like to extend it. And so we give you this ability to build on what we already have in the defaults, or actually fully replace it, so that for your org, or for just your product, you can have what makes sense to you as far as generating new projects. You can find out more from Mike Brocky, who's going to come up and talk about becoming an Angular tailor. Mike Brocky works he's not works at Google. He doesn't work at Google, but he does work full-time on the Angular CLI, so he pretty much knows what he's talking about. All right. One more thing that we're adding to the repertoire of the CLI is an ability that we've had at Google, but it's not been externally available, which is a different build system. And we want to offer it as a CLI build option. And some of the features that Bazel has you might be interested in. Number one is it knows how to build more than just JavaScript. So if I've got a project where maybe the backend or some other part of it is built in C# or Java or Go or some other language, Bazel probably knows how to build it all as one project together, so I can know that everything's going to be in sync when I go for deployment. It's also built on a very scalable, parallelizable infrastructure so that it can go very, very fast, even as your code base grows to hundreds of thousands of files. We know this because we have to upgrade everybody at Google, and so we build everything, run all the tests, and make sure everything's good before we release it to you. And so we think this is a really nice future for being able to scale. Again, this is a labs project, not quite ready, but Alex Eagle is going to come up. Alex is a member of the Angular team, talking about Angular with Bazel and Clojure. Clojure is that compiler that we looked at earlier. So beyond those basics in the platform, we have a number of what I'll call first-party features, features that we build to help you with that full end-to-end task of how do I build applications. Building on the structure and test that we had in AngularJS, we added really the things that folks at Google and all of you asked us for. Let's dig into a couple of them. The important things about these being first party is that they're guaranteed to work together. There's no integration for you folks to do. You can start up knowing that these are the pieces that are going to work well. They perform at Google scale, and we know this because we build giant Google products with them. And as I mentioned, they're going to be tested across hundreds of apps. Before we ever release Angular versions to you folks, you can know that they've already been integrated into hundreds of applications at Google, tested and validated, so that we've got a really good base level of reliability. The router that we have, this is what handles the application navigation. It supports lifecycle hooks, a rich array, so that I can perform work both before, during, and after the routing changes. And if you've got complex scenarios, like I've got some child or sibling routes, we can handle that. It handles redirects and guards, so we make sure that people only go where they're supposed to. And since routes are a nice way to sort of demarcate the places in my application that people need to visit, we've built some automated lazy loading support around the router so that you can get that feature, so that when somebody visits the first route, they only load the code that's necessary for that. And as they visit subsequent routes, they load incremental bits of code to make sure every route they visit is fast. So Deborah Kurata is going to talk about this on the many adventures of Angular routing. Deborah is a Google developer expert. She's also a Microsoft MVP, and she's a very popular author on Pluralsight. So she probably knows what she's talking about. We've spent a lot of time making sure that you can have very compelling and easy to create animations with Angular. You can do, with very little code, multi-element coordinated animations, with or without staggering. You can actually coordinate it with route transitions between pages. So some of the elements in one route can go to the next route. And you build this all with easy JavaScript idioms and a sort of DSL in JavaScript. And you can use these JavaScript idioms to build up libraries of animations that are reusable across your project or even across your entire organization, so you have a standard set that everybody can use. And one of the things I'm most happy about is these animations are actually testable. You can actually, in unit tests, validate that the animation does exactly what you think it should do. Samantha Rhodes is going to come up here and talk about this. Samantha's in the front row. She's 16 now. She was 15 when she learned AngularJS, and 16 when she learned Angular. She's got a lot of energy. Yeah, pretty good. Apparently, she's actually making money doing Angular now, wants to save up for a new car. I think she's going to make it. So. And there's a ton more. For localizing your site and making sure you have proper intellectualization to hit any audience you want in the world. Forms is kind of the lifeblood of most enterprise applications. How do I get the data that I want, validate it, make sure the users have a good experience or guided through the entry process? We have HTTP client and RPC mechanism for getting data to and from the server. It's really the latest one we have. Alex Rickabell worked on it. It's very nice for both the API and for testing. We talked a lot about testing. We have support for unit testing in the Karma tool, support for easy-to-write, maintainable integration tests in Protractor. And we've worked with the Google security team to make sure that Angular is hardened for everything you might want. Now, in addition to all those sort of non-visual libraries, we also address the space of UI components. And if you're at Google, this means you're going to be using material design with Angular Material, which you can find at material.angular.io. And this is great. And actually, tons of companies other than Google use Angular Material as well, and you can too. But we know that not everybody wants to use that flavor of UI elements. And so I'm really excited that we have so many partners who have built other UI sets. And so from VMware, we have the Clarity project. Infragistics, one of our sponsors here. Wijmo, Kendo UI, Prime Faces, the Bootstrap with NG Bootstrap. And if you're building for Salesforce, you might check out the Lightning components. You can find all of these and more at angular.io/resources. But we wanted to do even more. Because we on our core team, we can only build one UI suite. And in material components, we have a ton of components, everything you might need for building out big applications. But we've built that on top of something we call the Component Developer Kit. And like with schematics, that is the base for the CLI that we're allowing you to build on, we want you to be able to build on the base that we've used to build material components, where we provide really all the hard work has been done. Well, maybe not all. But things that are hard to get right, like accessibility, doing overlays, doing fast performance scrolling. And we have sort of base components that are not styled that you can use to build whatever you want. For example, the table component can be used to build whatever type of high-performance, big, scalable data table that you might want. Jeremy Elborn. Jeremy is the tech lead for the Angular Material team. He's going to come up later today and talk about the CDK. You should check it out. So then we want to make sure that wherever your audience is, whatever user base you want to reach, you can get to on the Angular platform. The thing I want to talk about first is a new technology suite called Progressive Web Apps. And Progressive Web Apps, or PWAs, addresses a number of the problem spaces we have in mobile. And one of the ways that we'd like to be a little closer to a native environment in mobile would be re-engagement, where I draw my users back in. If I'm able to get them to my site, I do a really good job of SEO, and I build some engaging content, how do I make sure it's easy to bring those users back in? And one of the things this gives you is the ability to add your icon to the home screen. And so if you can get the user to come back to your site, again, within a 2-week period, they can get prompted to add your icon to the home screen so they can have a really easy way to launch your application again. And when they launch it, it launches without the URL bar, because we want this to behave like an application. And it's really pretty much indistinguishable from any of the native applications. The next thing that this allows me to do is push notifications. where I can offer this to the users, and if they say yes, then we can push them notifications from our server even when our application is not running. And these look just like my native application notifications on the lock screen or on my title bar, and brings us a lot closer to being able to do exactly what we can do in native apps. And then the last thing I'll talk about is speed. Because if I'm launching a native app for my mobile phone, it's going to show a lot quicker than if I have to load a website over a flaky connection or low bandwidth. And one of the technologies inside PWAs is called service workers, and this is what this does for us, where on my second visit, we can do a much better job of caching the content and data so that I can have bits on the screen. I can actually render the app in under a second, even on flaky connections or when there's no connection at all, like on an airplane or some parts of the country. And you as a developer, you get much better controls for managing that offline workflow and helping them get to the right content. One site you can go to check this out using the Angular technology with PWAs is shopstyle.com, where they get all of these effects where you can re-engage the user and have a much faster experience for them. They also use it for their desktop site, because who wouldn't want to have a faster second visit or maybe push notifications on their desktop? Another one you might go check out, you probably will, that uses progressive web apps is our very own Angular Docs site. It was actually really handy for me when I was building some of these slides on the airplane, and I didn't have an internet connection. Surfs around just fine. You can check this out with Maxime. Maxime's another Angular developer expert, Google developer expert, and he's got creating Angular apps, creating Angular progressive web apps. Also, you can check out progressive web apps with Angular and Firebase from Eric Haddad. And Eric is a member of the Firebase team, so he probably knows some inside track information he can share with you. Next thing I want to talk about is how do we get bits to the screen faster in all scenarios through server-side rendering. And the way this works is when a user makes a request to my server, you can run part of your application, the part that renders that first screen, on the server in Node.js. And then you send back just HTML, a much smaller payload. You don't have to send the whole application, just the bits that render that first screen. And then users can consume that first screen while your app is downloading, and then your app in JavaScript can take over in Angular and do everything from there. We've improved this in the latest release with something we call state transfer, which is where on the server, when I made a request to my database to get the data to render that on the server, I can just actually move that across to the client and re-render much quicker than I could before, so that the user feels like it's a really continuous experience. We've also made server-side rendering much more robust by having really a full DOM API over there using a library called Domino. I want to give a big shout out to Jason Jean at Forbes.com. He's helped us make this very robust in the latest release and integrate it with the CLI so you can get started quickly. So thanks, Jason. It's been awesome working with you. You can find out more about this from Vikram, who's a member of the Angular team in pre-rendering for Angular apps. And then Steve Sanderson, one of my favorite people, is going to come up and talk about ASP.NET.Core for Angular developers. And you can see how to do Angular server-side rendering in an ASP environment. Last place I'm going to look, native mobile. So where you probably do need a mobile web presence, and we think progressive web apps are a great way to do that. There's some times where your users are actually going to be looking for your applications in the App Store or the Play Store, and you really need a native mobile experience there. And so there's a couple options you could use to build native mobile apps with Angular. One would be NativeScript from Progress Software. It gives you native access from Typescript to everything on the platform. Anything that you wanted to access on iOS or Android, you can get to from NativeScript. And so you build your applications actually out of native UI components. You get access to the accelerometer and the GPS and the camera. And at the same time, you get to reuse web idioms and things like developing in Angular and using CSS to style components. And so the skills you've already built up using Angular, you can reuse here in NativeScript. And their community has built hundreds of plugins you can use for things like login and camera access and all the things you might want to do to get going quickly and build out your mobile applications. Another option you could pick would be Ionic, the Ionic framework at ionicframework.com, where they actually do use a full web stack. And they render the UI via the DOM. And they've built up a set of UI components that look native for iOS, Android, and Windows. So you can really provide an experience that looks like whatever platform your users are on. You get access to things like the camera and GPS through Cordova plugins. And they've got a prototyping UI that's a web app that you can go to ionicframework.com and you can go check it out to get started really quickly. Sani Youssef is going to be part of the conference here, where if you're an organization who wants to look at how do I share code between desktop, mobile web, and maybe even some other environments, his talk on 6 apps, 1 code with Angular should be pretty interesting. All right. So as I mentioned, we're here to really hear what you folks want to do. We want to, our passion is about bringing stuff that's good at Google to the outside world and getting your feedback and making it even better. So I and my team, we're here to talk with you, hear what you're trying to do. Please come find us. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great show.